Okay, one-step equations then. Well, the first thing to think about is what an equation is. Let's remind ourselves. It's but it starts firstly with expression. So let's start with an expression. Now, an expression is kind of any little bit of algebra. Could be 5x plus 1. It could be 7y. It could be a plus b. It could be all sorts of things, infinite amount of things. And all of these are expressions. None of them are equations until you have, say, an equals sign in there with something else on the other side. Now, as soon as you've got an equals sign, we've got an equation. Because equation sort of starts with the same sort of letters, really, equals equation. And it could be, it's just saying that two sets of things are equal. The things on the left-hand side of my equal sign and the things on the right-hand side of my equal sign. So there's my equal sign. Now, whatever I put on this side, the other side must be equal. Now, that could just be 2. Or maybe I put the 2 on this side and I put a couple of things on this side, 1 plus 1. Obviously, this 2 is equal to the 1 plus 1. As long as whatever's on the left-hand side is equal to whatever is on the right-hand side, then it's fine. And that could be with letters. So I could put an x on this side, and then I'd have to put an x on the other side. If I added 5 to this side, well, to keep it equal, I'd have to add 5 to this side as well. So the basic thing is whatever's on the left must be equal to whatever is on the right. Okay. Now today we're going to solve some equations. Now that just means find the value of the missing letter. So let's say I just made up some equation here, or 2x plus 1, and we're going to say that that is equal to 8. What this means is 2 times something plus 1 equals 8. And what I want to do is find the value of the something, find the missing value that's in there. That's what solve means. If you see solve, it means find the value of the missing letter. Now to do that, I'm going to need to use what we call inverse operations, opposite operations basically. If there's a plus in there, I'm going to use a minus, so plus and minus are inverses of each other. And if I had a times, and I do have a times here because 2x means 2 times x. Hidden in there is a little times that we don't really write. To do that, I would do a divide because times and divide are inverses of each other. Right, let's get rid of that and let's move on to the next one. So let's have a look at a question. So x plus 5 equals 17. This means something. When I add 5 to it, I get 17. And my aim when I'm solving is to get the letter on its own on one side of the equal sign, because as soon as I get to the point where I've got x equals whatever it is, I will have solved my equation. So I need to get rid of anything else that's there. I need to sort of unpick the equation going backwards, which is why I'm going to use the inverse, because I want plus 5 to disappear from this side, and so to do that I'm going to take it away. I'm going to take away 5, because let's think, 5 take away 5 leaves nothing. Okay, that sort of turns into 0. But remember, what we do on one side of the equal sign I must do on the other, otherwise it's no longer equal, because if x plus 5 equals 17, I've got to take 5 away from here, then I must take 5 away from here to keep it equal as well. Now 17 take away 5 is 12, and I'm already at a point where I've got x equals 12. That is my answer. I get a little smiley face because it's answered. That's done. These are called one-step equations because there's only ever one little step to try and solve them generally. Okay. Right, let's try another question. X take away 11 equals 25. So another way of thinking of this is something, that's my x, minus 11 equals 25. Okay, well I want to get x on its own, and to do that I'm going to get rid of my minus 11. Now the opposite of minus 11 is to add 11, because these two things together cancel out. 11 take away 11 leaves nothing. But what I do on one side of the equal sign I must do on the other. So over here we've just got the x left on its own. Sad poor lonely x. And then 25 plus 11 equals 36. So I know that x is equal to 36. I have solved my equation. Another question. So 4x equals 18. Well, what does 4x mean? It means 4 lots of x, 4 times x. Hidden in here is a little times sign that we don't usually write. And so I don't want 4 x's, I only want one of them. So I need to go from having 4x just down to 1. So I need to sort of cut it into 4 equal pieces. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to divide. But what you do to one side, you must do to the other. Now 4 of something divided by 4 gives you 1 of something. 18 divided by 4 is 4.5. And the answer isn't always a whole number, so a decimal is fine as well, or possibly a fraction. And x equals 4.5 is my answer, because 4 lots of 4.5 is 18. Last example. Okay, we've got a little line in here. What's this line mean? Well, it's a fraction line. And what maths is that? Well, that is divide. X, when I divide it into 6 pieces, equals 5. Now, to get x as in a whole x, I don't want just 1/6 of it. I need all 6 pieces to make up the whole x there. So I use times, and that's the inverse of divide, isn't it? This is divide, this is times. So we will do that to both sides of the equation. Now this side ends up with just a whole x, x on its own, and 5 times x is 30. Okay, so do the inverses for each one and get x on its own. Now, you could use any letter. I happen to have used x in these cases because I want to keep it all kind of the same. But this would work for any letter because remember, the letter just stands for a number that we don't know yet. Okay, now what I want you to do now, there are 4 questions. I want you to, in a second, pause the video. I want you to just get a pen and paper, scrap of paper, just write down the equations here, and then solve each one and find what the value of x is. Well, let's get rid of that little bit of writing. So find out what x is for each one, and then unpause the video and see if you're right. So press pause now. Okay, so we've unpaused. You should have done your questions. Let's have a look. Right, x plus 9 equals 23. I want to get x on its own, so I can find out what it's worth. So instead of adding 9, I'm going to take 9 away, because that will cancel out to leave nothing, so it's just x on its own. But what you do to one side, you must do to the other. So I'm going to add x onto this side. Oh, it's take away, isn't it? So he said I was just about to add 9. So 23 take away 9 is 14. Concentrate, Mr. Nias. Get that right. Okay, so x take away 7. So something take away 7 is 28. Well, to get x on its own, I need to get rid of the minus 7. So I'm going to add 7, because 7 take away 7 leaves nothing. So over here it's just x. But what I do to one side, I must do to the other. So I'm going to add 7. 28 plus 7 is 35. Tick. We've got 4x equals 24. Well, I don't want 4 x's. I only want one of them. So what am I going to do? I'm going to do the opposite of times, which is what this is, 4 times x. And I'm going to divide by that number. Whatever that number touching x is, that's what you divide by. Plus or minus, whatever it is, you just divide by it. 24 divided by 4 is 6. Little tick. And what we got? X divided by 4 equals 7. We don't want, this is like a quarter of x, isn't it? X divided into 4 pieces. I want a whole x. I want to find out what that is. So instead of divide, which is what the fraction line means, I'm going to times it by that number. Whatever that divide is, whatever that number is, you're going to times by it. So 7 times by 4 is 28. That is an 8, I promise. Tick. Great. Okay, good stuff. Right. Now, what I want you to do next is go to... Oh, no, I forgot about these when I did this earlier and I got the video all wrong as well. We've got some slightly harder examples, okay, just to see if you can figure these ones out. Now, I've got a minus x here. I don't want a minus x. that sort of makes things a little bit complicated. And there are about 3 or 4 different ways you can deal with this. But I think the most straightforward way is to go, well, I don't want the minus x here. I'm going to do a little trick. If I add x, well, that's going to cancel out, because remember, plus x minus x, basically x minus x, cancels out to leave nothing. So it'll be 21. But my x doesn't completely disappear, because if I add it to the left-hand side, I must add it to the right-hand side as well. So 13 plus x equals, well, just 13 plus x, but that's all we need to write. You can't add the x to the 13 as such, other than just write it out as a little expression there, 13 plus x. Now my x is positive, so I can sort of do what I would have done before. I'm going to do, I want to get rid of the 13, so x is on its own. Doesn't matter that it's on the right-hand side, as long as it's on its own. So that's, this 13 is a positive 13, isn't it? We don't usually write it, but it is positive 13 there. So if I do negative 13 minus 13, those two things cancel out. They turn into 0. I'm taking 13 away from that side, but I must do it to both sides, and I'm left with 21. Take away 13 is 8. So x must be 8. And it doesn't matter that it's 8 equals x. It means the same thing. These two things are equal, so x equals 8. I'm going to have to get rid of my previous writing there, aren't I? Okay. All right. Minus 3, or negative 3x equals negative 24. And I want to get x on its own. Now remember, we said when we've got a number touching a letter like this, it means times. So I'm going to divide. And I'm going to divide by whatever that number touching x is. And that number is negative 3. So I'm going to divide by negative 3. And that does exactly what we expect on the left, because negative 3 divided by negative 3 leaves 1. So it's just 1x. Now, negative 24 over here, divide it by the negative 3. Well, 24 divided by 3 is 8, because there's 3 8s in 24. But a negative divided by a negative, we have to use our rules on this one. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. So x equals 8. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Positive 8 times by negative 3 would give you negative 24. And last one, this one is a bit tricky. You might not come across this until sort of, a different year, but we'll tackle it anyway. When the letter is trapped underneath your little fraction there, we're going to do the same thing we would normally do, which is, this is a divide. So I'm going to do a times, and I'm going to times by that x. Because what that's going to do, instead of 18 being divided by x, we're sort of going to divide it by x and times it by x. Remember, these two things cancel out, don't they? Just leaving 18. But whatever we do to one side, we must do to the other. So we're going to times the right-hand side by x as well. Now 6 times x, we just write as 6x. And look, now we've got a little equation that we've solved loads of these kind of things before. We know exactly what to do. All we've done is manage to sort of free up this x. It's no longer trapped underneath. It became a nice line. We don't really want these fractions. We want a nice straight linear line. Now 6x, how do I get rid of that? Instead of having 6x, just have 1x. Well, we divide by the number touching x. We divide by the 6, just like we did before. But what you do to one side, you must do to the other. So 18, also divided by 6, is 3. So x must be equal to 3. And if you go back to the original equation, that makes sense, doesn't it? 18 divided by 3 equals 6. So that's right. Right, now, what I want you to do is, there's a little link in the bottom right-hand side, bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Now, you don't need to type that in. That's just there in case you've lost the other link. In the Show My Homework post or email, however you got this homework, there should be a link to a page I want you to go to, which should have a worksheet looking a bit like this. Now, your questions will be different, because every time that you click on this little button at the bottom here, you get a new set of questions, which means you can practice lots. But you only need to do this once, as long as you get a good score. If you're not getting a good score, I would like you to try it again. What you do, you solve the equation. So n minus 5 equals 3. Well, to get rid of the minus 5, I would add 5. which means n must be equal to 8 if I solve that. Obviously, you might need to write these down on a piece of paper. When you get to the end, you then click on the check answers button, not the show answers, but the check answers, and that will mark it for you. Okay, now don't click on the show answers unless you're really stuck, because what that does, it shows you all the answers and then you can't answer the questions. Okay, if you need to, if you've done that, you just need to click on new worksheet to get a new worksheet. Okay, right, good luck.